So thank you again for joining. I'm Jodie Gunn. I'm the CEO of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance. And I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that have joined us in the audience and that are on our panel today. It's important to note as we kick off these deep dives that the work of the handbook that I'll talk to in a moment and how we apply it envisages a future where funding and finance becomes more accessible and equitably shared with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And that through the delivery of our online program, we'll continue to highlight the opportunities for and leadership by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members and partners. I mentioned a handbook. In February, we launched our Conservation Finance Handbook, which provided a comprehensive analysis of the various funding mechanisms and levers that are available to fund conservation in Australia. We advised that we would follow with a series of webinars across the year to take deeper dives into key topics. The webinars that we hold are a key part of ALCA's Conservation Finance Network and the development of that aims to bring the conservation sector together with investors from business, government and philanthropy to explore opportunities to increase the financial flows to conservation. So today's webinar is the first of four, and it has a focus on philanthropy and nature. So through a mix of context-setting presentations and case studies from the field, this webinar will provide an understanding of the philanthropic landscape, including the different kinds of philanthropic giving available for conservation, from corporate and employee philanthropy to family foundations. Case studies will be provided today as well that demonstrate how these different approaches are working, with discussion around the particular role that philanthropy can play in catalysing funding and finance for nature. We've got an incredible group of people today who will be sharing their knowledge and their experience to help you better understand the opportunities, the challenges, and the unique pathways that philanthropy can play in accelerating your impact. It's probably also important to note at the outset that those that have joined us on the panel are but a tiny sliver of the partners and the funders and the partnerships that are operating, and that they are not coming to the webinar with an intent necessarily to advise you on how to apply to their particular foundation or organisation, though if they'd like to, obviously they can. They are simply here to share their insights. So bottom line, please don't pitch them to them immediately following unless they've invited you to. Let me outline a little how today will run. Firstly, you're going to hear from Margie, Jenkin and Sam Murray. Margie is the Environmental Program Manager with the Australian Environmental Grantmakers Network, with deep knowledge of our sector, and she'll share insight on philanthropy broadly. Sam Murray is the CEO of Indigenous Desert Alliance and will provide insights on philanthropy for First Nations-led initiatives, the challenges and the opportunities, and why it's absolutely critical that we all build these insights into our considerations. Then we'll turn to hear about two case studies. Firstly, Heather Campbell, the CEO of Greening Australia, and Vidusha Gingoda from the Pryor Family Foundation will have a discussion about their long-term partnership, followed by another case study duo. Alex Nankivell, the CEO of the Nature Foundation from South Australia, will share their partnership with the South Australian Power Network's Employee Foundation through a conversation between Alex and Leanne Robinson, the people and culture changer from the foundation. Following this, there will be an opportunity for questions. So I already have a handful of questions I'd love to ask. So if you don't put your questions in the chat, we will have plenty to talk about, but I would like to give you priority. So please put your questions in the Q&A tab, your comments in the chat, and we look forward to that discussion towards the end. So without further ado, I would really like to welcome Margie Jenkin, followed by Sam Murray, for the first part of our conversation. Margie, it's a pleasure to hand it over to yourself. And just jump off mute there if you can.
Thank you so much, Jodie. Sorry about that. I'll just do a little screen share, just a sec. And we'll get underway. Thanks so much for the introduction, Jodie, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm just Oops.
Let us know if you want Phoebe to jump in to share if the tech isn't
Actually, that'd be
quite
great, Phoebe, if you could do that, if you don't mind. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, lovely to be here. As Jodie said, I manage the Nature program at the Australian Environmental Grantmakers Network. For those who aren't familiar with AEGN, we're a member network of around 200 environmental philanthropists, and we convene our members to be better connected with experts and with each other, so they can be more inspired and effective in their giving. So just the next slide, thanks, Phoebe. So we do this through convening events, webinars, conferences, with the intention of building capacity and capability and connection of environmental philanthropists. So we have a platform on which funders can also share projects that are seeking support, and to really be endorsing critical work that's happening across the sector. Spoiler alert, though, philanthropy is no silver bullet. It's a very small part of revenue that's generated for charitable organisations across Australia. In fact, it's just 7% of charitable income, about half of income, and that's not just for the environment sector, but generally, but about half comes from government and another 43% from fee-for-service and goods and services. So I guess just to name that up front, that it's not a silver bullet. Next slide. Thanks, Phoebe. I wanted to introduce, though, just in setting the context, an annual report that AEGN puts together called the Environment and Climate Change Giving Trends Report. So this is imperfect data. I've got to say, in Australia, we don't have the full picture of all of the giving for any sector. Delayed releases and also inconsistent and incomplete reporting formats. But what we do is look at the data that's available and then produce this report annually. So I'll just skip us through some of the key findings. Next slide. Thanks, Phoebe. So nationally, some of the things that we've identified: environmental charities receive about 2% of total contributions. So that in 2022, a bit of a lag, as I said, with the data, but that was nearly 300 million. So environmental giving is small. We do know too, though, that about a third of Australia's largest donors, so the 50 of the biggest philanthropists, along with half of the 50 biggest corporate philanthropic organisations, are giving to the environment. So some of the largest philanthropic gifts are actually going to the environment, or at least some of the largest donors, be that corporate or foundational donors, are giving to the environment. That's encouraging. And also that those large donors are giving more overall, so their giving's growing. So that's also something we can be pretty optimistic and positive about. Next slide, thanks, Kitty. With our members, we do an annual giving survey, which not all of our members actually complete, but we do have a bit of a picture about AEGN members. So collectively in 2023-24, our members gave around 247 million to climate and environment, and almost a third increased their giving from the previous year. So again, that's encouraging. From the data we collect from our members, around 12% are funding First Nations initiatives, with about 10% First Nations-led organisations. Outside of the AEGN, I understand it's about 0.5% of private philanthropy in Australia that's directed to First Nations-led organisations. So name that we need to do much better in that space. Next slide. Thanks, Phoebe. So another thing that's emerging is that there is an intergenerational wealth transfer. So $5.4 trillion will change hands over the next 2 decades. So basically, the baby boomers are passing the finance, if you like, to their children, also hopefully to some charitable organisations as well. But that's a huge transfer of wealth. There's also forecast to be an increase in wealth held by women, which is interesting, and also to note that corporate giving is increasing. So there are a few trends that we're seeing. It is terrific that giving is growing and that there is some changes happening, but there remains, an overall funding shortfall in the landscape. So I guess philanthropy can do some work, but it cannot excuse government support, or government can't kind of divest itself of funding responsibilities. That's quite critical in this conversation. We've got some really ambitious targets with the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and we need government support. I guess just to name that, we can't think that philanthropy will cover all the things. It really won't. Philanthropy can, though, do great work. This slide is an introduction to some of AEGN's publicly facing members. You can hear some of their stories through the podcast on that QR code there. I want to say too, though, that there's no one way, that funders are very different in the way that they fund, in both the sort of administrative process, in the priorities that they have. There's some large structures with staff, there's some individuals without any kind of structure per se. So yeah, it's not that one size fits all, far from it. I guess the question around when should philanthropy step in and what is its superpower? To the next slide, thanks, Phoebe. I think the superpower really of philanthropy, and this has come from experts as well as from what we have seen really works. Philanthropy can provide really flexible and nimble funding. And I won't go into these in detail as kind of case studies, but invite people to do some research online to find out more of these examples. So the Nature Impact Collective is a terrific example of flexible and nimble funding coming from philanthropy. Philanthropy can provide amazing leverage, and a really exciting example of that from 2007 was the David Thomas Challenge, where the David Thomas Foundation put in $10 million, and through the Nature Conservancy, that money was really leveraged. I think it ended up being something like just over 28 million, ultimately, with other philanthropists, with government and private investment coming on board to then enable really important funding for a range of initiatives for conservation across Australia. So a great example of leverage. Enabling advocacy and, the work that ALCA is doing is so critical. I think also the Biodiversity Council is a great example where philanthropy has enabled capacity building for an organisation to be really effective in doing some of that work around policy reform and supporting greater ambition in Canberra and mobilising expertise and effort across the sector. Also, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail, the work of testing, trialling and de-risking. And there are some examples of this. I'm just pointing here to the coin, the Tasmanian Midlands property of Wedgetail Foundation and Lisa Miller. If you don't subscribe to the coin journals, I really recommend signing up to hear about the work that they're doing on what is essentially a conservation property test case around the feasibility and viability of nature restoration within the marketplace. Anyway, sign up and read more. But I wanted to get into this a tiny bit more. If we can move to the next slide, Phoebe. I've got a quote here from John McLeod from JBWare Philanthropic Services, who's also an AEGN member. A lot of amazing research on philanthropy, including the Bequest report, the support report. He does the Australian Fin Review, Philanthropy 50 for foundations, but also for corporate giving too. And to that end, actually, the AFR 50 for this last financial year is coming out this week. But John says philanthropy is different to other funding. It's the risk capital of the sector and allows charities to search for new solutions. So next slide, please, Phoebe, to sort of demonstrate this. I wanted to share this continuum of finance diagram, which AEGN's chair, Dr. Catherine Brown, who's an enterprise professor at Melbourne Business School, she's positioned philanthropy here as essentially the sort of first mover in a blended finance framework. So philanthropy here can basically provide finance to create, the testing, the trialing, not, I guess, a higher level of risk around trying a new idea, and then actually invite other finance, be that institutional, government and the like, that then step in, I guess, to be providing additional support once that idea has been tried and tested. So it's there's another QR code. I've got quite a few QR codes in this presentation, but you can read the full article and here learn more about this within the sort of catalytic role, I guess, of philanthropy. The fact it can take more risks and make a case for other investment is quite key, I think, in some of the nascent spaces around market-based mechanisms and the like. Before I wrap up, next slide, Phoebe, introduce another example, I guess, of this de-risking idea, Transition Accelerator, which was founded by Alan Schwartz of Trawalla Group, who's also an AEGN member, is doing exactly that. So really looking at opportunities to expand the scope for profitable investment in solutions. I mean, the frame is climate, but we know that nature-based solutions are so much part of that space. So they provide that catalytic capital to overcome investment barriers and to basically then be unlocking other commercial capital, essentially. So encourage you to have a look at some of the stuff that they're starting to sort of test and try. Next slide, thanks, Phoebe. So I wanted to also appreciate that some people on the call might be not quite seeing themselves in this necessarily, but to note, to sort of start where you are. If you're an NGO seeking to grow your philanthropic support, or if you're a philanthropist looking to develop your giving, just start where you are. Know that there are many ways and that there's no one way really to be approaching philanthropy. It comes in so many shapes and sizes. For NGOs, there are a bunch of different sorts of programs, regular giving, bequest programs, property acquisition, project-specific grants, all sorts of ways, I guess, that you can invite philanthropic support for your cause. And I think something that's key is sort of knowing what your value is, what it is that you can do, and to really be articulating that story well, knowing your networks and who are the supporters who are likely to back your idea, build those relationships, tell the stories and show the value of the work that you're doing. So yeah, I appreciate that for conservation landholders, be that land for wildlife, covenanted properties. A lot of them are also philanthropic, involved in different initiatives and giving, their time for their own patch. But they may also be able to provide other support in other ways. So to, I guess, be thinking about who's within your network, and to also, of course, be considering that First Nations Australians in whatever the local patch is and the ideas, they need to be front and centre in this really critical work, healing country. That's essentially it for me. That last slide points to our website, and to accentuate, there's no one thing or one way. We need different approaches. Good things happen when we work together. Yeah, really look forward to hearing from some of the other speakers. Thank you. And
Margie,
I'll
thank you so
stop
much.
sharing.
Thank you, Margie, for that. That's wonderful. I think one of the things I just quickly reflect before we move on is I love the way you describe the superpowers, and also the way you said start where you are. Obviously, so many ways of doing this. One of the things I think about when I think about the superpower of philanthropy, and I look across our membership, some $380 million being spent on the ground every year, the collective annual revenue being spent. The majority of which comes from philanthropy. So for our sector, philanthropy has been a superpower, funding the core work, funding the impact for conservation and people. And I think for me, I see that as a real superpower as well. So thanks, Margie, so much for sharing that. And we'll come back to some questions shortly after. It's now my pleasure to introduce Sam Murray, the CEO of the Indigenous Desert Alliance, who is leading the charge on some incredible work happening across a huge part of country. Sam, I'm not going to say any more. Over to you. We're really pleased to hear from you.
Thank you, Jodie. And yeah, first I just want to acknowledge that I'm on Noongar Whadjuk Whadjuk country, Perth way, but and hello to everyone else online. As Jodie has said, I'm the CEO of Indigenous Desert Alliance. I myself am a Yilka Noongar Wongatha person, and the picture behind me, which looks like I've got smoke coming out of my head, is actually Yilka country, Spitafix country, which is 1,000 k's inland from Perth way. That I'm a traditional owner of. So that's a photo of my mob burning country out that way. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about philanthropy and how Indigenous organisations can connect up with philanthropy. So thanks for the opportunity to have a bit of a yarn. Wanted to provide a bit of a context about funding in this space, especially desert land management space, and talk a little bit about the challenges and also the great opportunities and how philanthropy can really get into supporting and connecting with First Nation groups on the ground that look after for country. Phoebe, if we could just show the map. So IDA is a member-based organisation. We're an alliance. We have 27 members on this slide, but we're up to 28 members. And to be a member of IDA, you need to be a Indigenous-led organisation or ranger team that's caring for country in the desert space. And that's the darker brown is the bit of a patch the IDA covers, which is roughly 1/3 of the country is desert country. So there's a lot of teams out there working hard in the middle of Australia to care for country and look after things like threatened species and special plants. The majority of the land management organisations and ranger teams that are working out there and caring for country and doing important environmental and cultural work, over 80% of their funding is purely reliant on government. You've got a big core group of people and communities that, in terms of mining or resource accessibility organisations, there's not a lot of that mines out there. In terms of really big dollar tourist value, in comparison to like the Great Barrier Reef, that is limited. And also just in general, things like nature repair markets, which is considered a income generating for some of the groups. That's something they can access in and slowly make their way into. But there's also a big chunk of that group of people that things like carbon projects and carbon markets are brand new, and biodiversity credits are something new. So in terms of the funding aspect in that desert space, it is very much reliant on government. And this is where philanthropy, I think, can play a really important role in terms of getting funding out there and connecting to groups on the ground who are still out there caring for country in a really culturally authentic way. And again, supporting what Margie is saying, we don't, we always have to rely on government they do have a responsibility to support these very important environmental projects and cultural projects. And it's more about how we can open up the door for philanthropy to get out there in a really good way. So some of the challenges for getting philanthropy funding out to the sector is obviously location. It's a long way. You've got to drive a long way to get out there. It's access points. As we've engaged with philanthropists through the times, it's how do we get out there? How do we connect to the groups? How do we hear those yarns and stories and other ways of getting that awareness out there? So I think that's a big challenge for getting philanthropy out there is the location, the distance, the access points. So that's a challenge. Understanding what IPAs or what ranger teams and the work we actually do. There's still a bit of understanding that needs to happen about what a ranger team is. What does it mean to maintain and look after Indigenous protected area? What are the important cultural sites out there that need to be protected? So a little bit of more information that kind of needs to be shared amongst with philanthropy friends. And just connecting the two worlds is something that's important too. That's just some of the challenges which I definitely think have been overcome and can be overcome. Excuse me. Some of the benefits and the ways that philanthropy really works for groups. We're an organisation that does receive philanthropy support as well, which is awesome, is something that I found personally connecting up with funders, especially family givers, and trust it's led by heart. What I found is most of the people who give to First Nation groups and organisations like ours and the ranger teams out there, it's because they genuinely are heart-led to want to support First Nation people and Indigenous-led conservation. So that's always a really good winning point. You're meeting with someone who's going to come and have a coffee with you or a meeting with you, and that they just want to, they're led by the heart. And that also flows in when you have those discussions with what that agreement or grant looks like. Because they're led by heart, it opens up the doors for people. An Indigenous person by me, like me, where culture is really important, and I'm able to talk to someone about what these places mean for me back at Cosmo, what it means to care for country, and you're talking to someone that really gets it. It's not about the stats of how many ranger number hours. You're talking to someone that they've been interested in their whole life, their family might be. So I found that really, really such a positive thing with working with philanthropists in trying to get funding out there. You're starting off with a heart-led, and that's a really good starting block. I think in terms of flexibility of funding, so having discussions and conversations with philanthropists, organisations, or independent family is about having that flexibility about explaining, look, we need to get funding to go out to a special site because an old fellow wants to go out there and show, cultural knowledge and pass it on to his grandchildren, and having that conversation where this ranger team can get funding from government for the fuel and the ranger wages, but we need to have some funding from philanthropists to support, getting the old person out and the wraparound support to get them out there. And you can see how that leveraging those different types of funding and having really great flexibility with philanthropists really helps Indigenous groups with that. And then you're able to have that conversation. So I find that's a really positive bonus point with working with philanthropists, is just that flexibility about telling a story and about leading with heart and culture, and then being able to change and shift that what the grant ends up looking. What does that donation look like? And then talking about that. Some of the challenge with that is, a bit of probably lack of understanding about maybe some cultural aspects and some First Nations world views. But I've come to recognise very quickly that people who come with an open mind and an open heart who want to give, they're also really open to learning. And so a lot of those engagements that I have with philanthropists in this space who are very new to First Nations world, very new to maybe the desert world, is they're very open to learning and understand. And in a way, we get to convert another advocate for the desert space and another advocate for rangers, which is really crucially important. That for me, actually, in some spaces, far exceeds the financial benefits. Don't worry, financial benefits are still valuable and very crucial. I'm just saying there's an extra bonus point in terms of connecting up with the groups on the ground as well. So in terms of, I think it's really exciting. I think there's a natural understanding that philanthropy can't fill those big gaps, and it probably shouldn't. But I also think there's really big potential and access points, and I think that's was probably the driving force for my predecessor Lindsay create the IDA Foundation. Was there was a really good access point for people to go to. It was approachable. It's a way that philanthropy groups can come and look at and be supported with having direct access to ranger teams on the ground. And I think that's what it's really about. And I've worked a bit with AEGN to get across a bit more of the cultural understanding of giving. And I think there's not many obstacles that can't be overcome. And I think it's the bigger thing, just to end off for me, is that journey and some of the good relationships I've built over time with groups and families and trust funds and individuals and organisations that have supported IDA and members is that building that relationship, you know, and it's also generational. It's like you build a good connection with that family member of that trust fund, and then, you know, you're dealing with some like their son or daughter are picking up the thing and wanting to continue on and supporting. And Aboriginal people, we're all a bit about personal relationships, as everyone knows, and building up a relationship with a family and knowing that we're going to have this real bond for a long time. It just really culturally sits right with us. And it's about the long term, and it's about, you know, what are the big changes. So I just wanted to end on that note, that there are what might be perceived challenges, obstacles in terms of philanthropists giving to First Nation groups, especially Indigenous land management organisations, ranger teams, but don't be afraid of that. Like, reach out. There's already philanthropists and organisations and individuals that are contributing, and there are some in the desert space, no matter even small. Is reaching out to those guys and those fellows and saying, look, how do you get into it, or how do you give in a way that gets to the ground, and reaching out to organisations like myself and the other land management organisations out there in the desert, and just having a yarn and starting to start that convo. Because if you're really genuine about giving to Indigenous people and Indigenous-led conservation, we can see that. I can pick that out a mile out, and that will just, you know, carry well for you going forward with those relationships. And I think I'll end it on that note, Jodie.
Fantastic, Sam. Thank you so much. You know, I heard relationships, heart, and flexibility as really important elements to this. I'd really love if I can just put a placeholder question, because I know we need to move on, but a placeholder question for later, sort of for the both of you, around this difference and gap between, I think, Margie, you talked about 12% of giving going to First Nations group, as opposed to this global, you know, what, less than 1%. And so I'm curious what it is that is happening here in Australia or within the AEGN context that's enabling and supporting and driving, if I've understood correctly, that increased level of funding going to First Nations groups here. And, you know, Sam possibly as well goes to the kind of work you're doing collaboratively and around helping to inform and educate people around that work. Congratulations, Sam, on all that you're doing in the space. And Margie, thank you. If you disappear into the background for a little bit, and we'll bring you back in when we come to Q&A. Thanks so much. It's now time to turn to our case studies. And without stealing their thunder or their detail, we're presenting on 2 long-term funding partnerships. Both have built relationships that have lasted for a decade or more. Now we know that not all funding relationships last that long, but we thought it would be really interesting to draw from the experience of those partnerships that have lasted the test of time, to learn from them about what it has taken to succeed, and how they've overcome challenges, to help us understand how to maximise that opportunity that philanthropic giving can have on conservation programs. Heather Campbell, CEO of Greening Australia, Vidusha Ganagoda from the Pryor Family Foundation. Wonderful to have you both. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jodie, and it's fantastic to be able to be on this webinar and just share part of our journey, our collective journeys. I'd like to start by acknowledging the country that I'm currently sitting on. I think Vidusha probably is as well, and that's Wurundjeri country, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We thought we'd share ours in a bit of a Q&A sort of style conversation to make it a bit more interactive. So I've got a series of questions here for Vidusha, and the first one is, who is the Pryor Family Foundation?
Thank you, Heather. Well, I thought we'll actually go back to where it started. I have a few slides which I hope will work, but let me just give it a go. Let me know if you can see that.
It's coming up slowly. I was thinking about it.
Getting there, we go.
Cool.
You might want to just...
well, I promise it's the only question I have slides for. So yeah, how it started was back in 2015, David and Sally Pryor founded Pryor Family Foundation. David's an entrepreneur. Sally also has a business/design background. So the two of them founded the Pryor Family Foundation. And why? It's because, at the time in 2015, they found that a lot of the problems that were being encountered by them were either hidden behind agendas or half-truths. So their intention with Prior Family Foundation was to do something meaningful and get to the issues, straight to the issues, and also bring an innovative approach to dealing with these issues. As I said, David's an entrepreneur, so he likes to do things in a certain, in an innovative way, out of box thinking. So that's what got started. We always say this when we have our meetings with our partners. Heather's probably, we're versed in this motto. So even though, it was, back in 2015, they had this motto, we still use it to this day. And that is, say what's needed, do what works. David believes that if you believe in something, stand up for what you believe in and, do the work. In terms of our pillars, what do we grant to within Prior Family Foundation? 3 pillars: culture, environment, and wildlife. And over 10 years, it's our 10-year anniversary, we have contributed to more than 60 initiatives in that 10 years. Our people behind PFF, we've got 4 directors and myself, so very, very small team. But I saw on Margie's slide over in that, and that's a very intentional reason why we're a small team. We like to keep it simple, and Margie's words exactly, flexible and nimble. And I think that really works for us. And in that 10 years, that hasn't changed. We started with a small team, we're still a small team. So that's who we are, Heather.
Thanks a lot, Fiducia. It's amazing working with the team. I think one of the real gems, as I've spent time as a new CEO at Greening Australia, is building that relationship and learning a bit of the history, because it has been a partnership for 10 years. So I just wondering if you can share, how did the actual partnership start? Because it's a little bit unusual and it's quite different from a lot of the corporate partnerships or other sort of philanthropic arrangements, but it also picks up some stuff that Sam said about relationships. So how did it start, Fiducia?
I wish I had a very elaborate reason, but there isn't. I was told, I wasn't here, but I was told it's simply because David really liked Brendan, who was the CEO of Greening Australia at the time. There's no other science behind it. David sat with Brendan, and Brendan obviously shared his vision, what he wanted to do with the Reef Aid project at the time. David just bought into that vision from Brendan, and that was it, and I think that really comes back to, again, David's, how he does business. He believes in backing people, and that's the approach he brings to Prior Family Foundation as well.
Yeah, which is absolutely fantastic. I think what it really highlights too is the importance of relationships and of trust, and actually spending that time building the relationships, sitting down and having the conversations, having those big ideas, and the role of philanthropy to be able to help solve those really big, hard challenges. So you mentioned about Reef Aid, which was a critical program and still is for Greening Australia. So what was it about that, and why did the Prior Family Foundation fund it? I know David's a surfer and he loves the water. For those of us who've been able to have that time out in a boat with him, he's definitely a water baby, whereas some of us are landlubbers. But why sort of fund that? What was it about those projects?
Yeah, it's definitely you've nailed it. David loves the ocean, and it's something like he loves doing when he was a kid. Even before he was surfing, all his family holidays were centered around the ocean. He lived down in the peninsula, and he's a passionate supporter of the ocean, and conservation of the ocean is very much close to his heart. And Reef Aid program, even though it's not work done on the ocean, it is still related to that conservation of the ocean in terms of the Great Barrier Reef. So just to recap something about the Reef Aid program is that the program works on reforestation and rehabilitating all the gullies and the catchments that lead the water through the land into the ocean. So there are two things that impact the coral health in the Great Barrier Reef, and that is, first one is obviously water temperature, and the second one is water quality. So the Reef Aid program, what it was working on was actually tackling that problem, that even before the water got to the ocean, how can we eliminate the runoff? Is that the word, Heather?
So it was really about that quality, and I think a key thing about the program was it was a catalyst for then, and the funding from the Pryor Family Foundation to then unlock a whole lot of other government, philanthropic, corporate money to really help scale it. So, the 3-year grant, which was I think 650,000, sort of got catalysed into 35 million. And an amazing impact that occurred through that program, and that's continuing now through our work, through the work of the NRM bodies and a lot of others. What is then absolutely fantastic is, because of that relationship between us and the Pryor Family Foundation, was then looking at, well, what's the next challenge for us as an organisation? And we'd always worked really closely with traditional owner groups across the country. But it was related to the relationships that the individual staff members had with those groups, which is fantastic. But we felt as an organisation we needed to build our capability. And the Pryor Family Foundation came on board with going, actually, yeah, you do. And we'll help you do that. And so they provided the funding to help us then develop our first reconciliation action plan, to develop a business plan for this area, and then working with us now, one of the key projects we're supporting is the training of traditional owners for native seed collection. And particularly at the moment, we're doing a pilot in Queensland and New South Wales. And the key to that is being able to have that funding to be that catalyst, to be able to do those sort of pilot programs, to develop that, to then be able to bring in other funding to support that. I recognise we're probably running out of time, are we, Jody? Yeah, I can see, that we are. So I'm just thinking, Vidusha, we might sort of jump a bit to that sort of the key successes, and if you can share what you believe the key successes from a Pryor family perspective, and then I'll do it from a Greening Australia perspective.
Yeah, sure. I think for us, the real reasons why this relationship has worked for 10 years is because Greening Australia has understood that the approach when they deal with us, that it's very much based on communication and alignment with our values. So when Greening Australia comes to us with a proposal, it definitely is not the everyday proposal they bring to us, because they understand that we're a family foundation and that our role is being a catalyst and doing something that's a bit more innovative. So at the seed stage. So as you can see, all of the programs that we have spoken about is very much in that early stage process, early stage where they need some, I guess something, it's still a risk for them to be doing the program, or and it's not something they know would work or not, but it's something that they'll come to us and they go, listen, we believe that this fits in with your values and this fits in with the things that we have done before. So I think that's the real reason for the success, is because they know, they understand us.
And I think from our perspective, working with Family Foundation that does want to be innovative, that it is about that openness, that transparency. I echo everything that Vidusha said. It is about building the relationships. So one of the really strong relationships we have now is with the head of our Thriving on Country Aboriginal Advisory Committee, who's on our board, Scott Anderson, and he's met with David, and it's handy that David goes surfing on the sort of south coast of Queensland, and that's where Scott lives, and they can catch up and they can continue to build that relationship. And so I think for me, it's openness, transparency, having the conversations, working together is really key. So I think we've run out of time, Jody, so I think it's back to you.
Thanks so much, Heather and Vidusha, and just wonderful to hear the building and the really practical examples of things that have just been shared previously, particularly in the context of relationships, flexibility, but also then the build and really giving us a demonstration of how philanthropy can be catalytic and giving us a real life example of that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Stick around and we'll be back shortly with the whole panel in a moment. Alex and Leanne, it's now my pleasure to introduce you both to share your case study. So without further ado, I will hand over to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jody, and good day, everyone online. We're on Kaurna country and also pay our respects to elders past and present. Hit the share.
I think it's just, there we go. It's coming up now as you speak, so feel free to get started.
Getting there. I can't see anything on my end.
It's come up on our end.
It has, yes. Yeah, cool. No worries.
Should be popping up.
Right, yeah. All right, so yeah, just a little bit about Nature Foundation first, for those that don't know who we are, as we're all the way over in South Australia. We're established in 1981 as the National Parks Foundation and initially raised money for the contribution to 22 national parks here in South Australia's Protected Area Network. And in 2010, as a result of the wonderful Caring for Country grant program, we were able to transition into owning and managing reserves, which we've grown to about 9 nature reserves now, just over 500,000 hectares. And we've had this relationship with South Australian Power Network's employee foundation for quite a number of years, just over a decade, and I'd just like to welcome Leanne to provide a bit of background about what the South Australian Employee Networks does.
And Alex, just before Leanne, you go, I think the screen is showing all the side slides as well, just for visibility. If you are able to put it in presentation mode, that would be great.
That's what I was doing before.
If it's too hard and fiddly, no problem. Just try and minimize the side screen a bit, just so the main screen gets bigger. Keep an eye on the chat, Alex, and it might be that the team gives you some instructions. I think that's just got worse. There we go. We're in. Perfect.
For a new computer.
Great. Thank you, Alex. So yes, my name's Leanne Robinson and I'm from SA Power Networks. So we are just by way of background, we are South Australia's sole electricity distributor, and we deliver power to approximately 1.7 million homes and businesses across South Australia. We employ approximately 3,000 people across the state, and we have our own charitable organisation, which is the Employee Foundation. And today I want to share a little bit about the work of the foundation and ways in which we've supported Nature Foundation. If you could just go to the next slide. Thanks, Alex. So a little bit of background on the Employee Foundation. So we commenced in 2006 and we are a registered charity governed by a committee, and I am one of the members of the management committee. So the foundation, the purpose of the foundation is to empower our employees, their families and friends to support local South Australian charities, and we do that through donations, fundraising and volunteering. So all of our staff do get a day of paid volunteering leave each year, and we encourage them to use that and go out into the community and give back to organisations that they personally align to. We're primarily funded by payroll donations, so a large majority of our employees do have deductions made from their from payroll, and every dollar that is donated goes to a charity. And the way that we select our charities is we actually go out to our people and ask them about the causes that are important to them. So we support charities that our employees feel really connected to. We do that in ways of making large corporate donations, as well as dollar matching for people who want to do their own fundraising activity. And we will offer up to $5,000 per fundraising activity to match what they have personally raised for the organisation of their choice. And so some of those things are homelessness, disadvantaged youth, cancer, and homelessness, domestic violence, and also obviously conservation and the environment. And in 2024, we supported 47 charities and we donated more than $600,000. And we're very proud that since our inception, we've actually donated over $5.9 million to various charities. And we're very proud that we're going to hit the $6 million mark later this year. So can you just go to the next slide? Thank you, Alex. So some of the work we've done with the with Nature Foundation. So we've been very, very proud to support Nature Foundation right since our inception. And so we primarily involve our employees in volunteering, citizen science, and obviously also inspiring them to help with the natural environment. And so we've done this through participating in 14 planting days. So over 400 people, 400 of our people have offered over 1,000 hours of volunteering time to help plant over 30,000 native species. And so we're really proud that some of the habitat that we have helped to nourish has helped the woodland birds and other species to thrive in those environments. And next slide, thanks, Alex. And so since our inception in 2006, we have also donated $160,000 in funds, and that's to support Nature Foundation's conservation and Aboriginal engagement programs. And you can see there a snapshot of some of those programs. And I'll hand back to Alex now so he can talk a little bit more about the impact that these contributions have had.
Thanks, Leanne. And as Leanne's outlined, it's been a great connection between the employee-driven desires of the organisation and their support for the environment, and it's led to some really tangible biodiversity impacts on the ground that we've been monitoring and measuring over those years. And we now manage 22 nationally threatened fauna and flora species across our reserve network. But at the time that we started the partnership with SA Power Networks Employee Foundation, that we were really on the initial stages of that journey, and it's been a seed funding in a sense that's allowed us to leverage and build that program across a much broader network of landscapes, but particularly at one of our reserves called Watchalanga, where they're specifically managing for the Mount Lofty Ranges southern emu wren, a critically endangered wren pictured in the photo there. The planting days were held there. Some of the planting days were held there, and there's also been a financial investment there as well. But the habitat re-establishment of that area has now seen those wrens utilising the revegetation, and has become a key core habitat area for the wren. So we're confident now that we're the source population in that region for that little subspecies. And also at one of our larger reserves, Hiltaba, in the Gawler Ranges, where we initiated a yellow-footed rock wallaby recovery program. We started off with about 15 animals, so it was getting fairly dire at that location. And just recently, through that program, we've now managed to get it up to over 200 individuals, and they're also dispersing across the landscape. And lastly, another example of real biodiversity impact on the ground is planting days that we've held at one of our restoration sites called Para Woodlands, where in 2003 it was a bare paddock, and our aim was to restore it into a natural grassy woodland habitats, and recorded about 24 bird species at that time, and just recently it's got up to the cumulative list has got up to about 120 species, of which a significant number of those are state, national, and regional conservation rated species. So it just gives a bit of a snapshot as to the impact that that this sort of support can have, and again, picking up on the other speakers, leveraging and catalytic in many ways. And again, it also facilitates some of our community impacts as well with our Kids on Country Junior Ranger program, which has been operating since 2017, and we've had about a little in excess of 500 Aboriginal young people come through that program, and that's an immersive grant program held at a couple of our reserves, where we teach about conservation, biodiversity, and cultural well-being, etc. And it's also become a SACE accredited program. So the students participating contributes to their education as well. So that's really been another fantastic sort of support for the organisation. And that's the end of our little slideshow. So we've managed to probably catch up a little bit of time. But again, thank you. The work that we've done there couldn't have been achieved in the early stages, and without the support of the South Australian Power Networks. And we excited about continuing it in the future.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Alex and Leanne. I love the demonstration of people power, delivering real conservation impact. It's really fantastic. And just to see a different kind of funding arrangement that's enabling the important work of the sector. We are well and truly over time. If folk are happy, I've got one question, and then let's let the people need to drop off. That's all good. We may carry on for an extra 2 minutes. My question, two questions, and they're addressing a couple of the ones that have been through the chat. And this is this opportunity or challenge of relationships. So relationships has come up across everybody that has spoken. And how do we future-proof the resilience of organisations by ensuring that the leadership or the relationship manager, that they don't affect the ongoing opportunities for the finance and the funding to continue, i.e., how do we connect the philanthropy group to the purpose once that relationship is established? And I wonder, Alex and Heather, whether you've got thoughts as leaders and relationship managers as to how we do that.
Heather, you want to go first?
Okay, I might as well go first. And look, I bring my experience of coming into Greening Australia, but also previously as CEO of Bush Heritage, and following on from Gerard coming there. And I think the key thing as a new CEO coming in is to spend the time respecting those relationships and recognizing that we're all different people as leaders, or philanthropy managers, or different team members, but spending the time to sit down and get to know each other and really doing that. So there's a connection with the work, not just with the individual, but recognizing that we are all different. And so the conversations will be slightly different. I think the other thing too is it's amazing getting philanthropists out into the landscape. Sam, I think you spoke about it, and that connection to the work that is happening on the land or the waters, and that is what connects people. So from my perspective, it is that deep connection to the projects, but also that time and energy that you need to put into just being humans together and getting to know each other and build trust.
Alex, anything you want to add to that?
I'll have a crack. Yeah. So, South Australia's obviously got a fairly, much lower population base as the eastern seaboard. So, clearly relationships are very important, but it is a smaller pool as well. So that's very important. But we do actually find it reasonably difficult because we have run such a lean operation for such a long time, and really driving most of our resources towards that on-ground effort. So we haven't had significant budgets to, really probably actively do this engagement, at a greater level. It's been a, smell of an oily rag type arrangement. But we sort of have needed to sort of try and ramp that up a bit, and certainly been doing that of recent times. But yeah, those relationships are just really critical to maintain in a smaller town. But yeah, we're certainly trying to improve and get better known, I suppose.
Yeah.
Jody, if I just might add to, if you're a large organisation, is having those multiple touch points, I think is key, so that when people are engaging with a project, they're with the rangers, they're having those conversations. They're different conversations that you have in different parts of the organisation.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to come back to my first question, but that I raised to Margie and Sam earlier around how we drive more funding, more philanthropy into First Nations-led organisations. So coming back to your point, Margie, around that 12%, and Sam, based on your experience, what's been happening that seemingly is increasing within the Australian context, direct funding to First Nations, but also recognising it's still not enough? How do we do more? And Sam or Margie? Whoever gets off mute first, I think. Go, Margie.
Well, I guess there's within the AEGN network, there is a cohort of funders that really want to be contributing financially to First Nations initiatives and First Nations-led organisations. So trying to kind of provide more support and buoyancy to that group is something, I guess, Ione McLean, who used to work with AEGN, who's actually now with Environment Centre NT and Environs Kimberley, did a lot of work in that space, and it will continue as well in the future. It's still something that AEGN's conscious we want to do better at. There's now a wisdom group that's been appointed to help guide the organisation, so we can be better informed and mindful of First Nations issues, and have that actually coming from First Nations leaders themselves.
Wonderful. Sam, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting about word of mouth. Like when you hear, people will reach out to us or yarn up with us because they've heard from another giver, or another philanthropist group or individual. So that's sort of sharing that yarning within those networks are really crucially important. And I think also just the awareness, like when we talk about the lack of, different types of funding. So, there are groups that are just purely funded out in the desert space by government for their ranger team and their work, and organisations that's the only funding they get. As you can imagine, heading up to the election and the nervousness that a lot of the mob feel, that, what does that mean for funding and support and the work we do, the crucial work that we do after those results land, and what happens and there's a change of government. So there's a beautiful thing with philanthropy where there's a bit more stability, in a sense where you have those relationships. It may not change like how the government funding would change. So I think, it's there's no obstacle that's too big to overcome, I think, in this space. And yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. We have well and truly gone over time, and I honestly could keep talking to you all for another hour. So we've heard a lot today. We've heard about relationships, we've heard about heart, we've heard about flexibility and the catalytic power of philanthropy. And Margie, you started with a wonderful introduction as well that gives insight and advice into how, as conservation organisations, land management, Indigenous organisations, we can think about accessing different kinds of funding opportunities and what they look like. And as I said, this is, we're really touching the surface here. There's some really interesting insights into the critical and expanding opportunity for philanthropy, but also really recognising, and we heard the point loud and clear, that it is not a replacement for government funding, and that government funding, is something that we must continue to call to action on. Thank you, panel. It's been wonderful to hear from you. At ALCA, as the peak body for private land conservation, and in our work to grow the impact, capacity and influence of our members in the sector, we're investing in strategies and capacity building around nature finance. So our goal is to support not just our members, but broader organisations, stakeholders, partners across private, government and not-for-profit sectors to harness nature finance opportunities and to uplift overall funding for nature. We do have some initiatives that have flowed on from our Conservation Handbook launch, including these websites that are available on the website, including these webinars. This has been a deep dive into philanthropy. Stay tuned. We're doing more deep dives into corporate and market mechanisms, including the government's role in conservation finance. So we will have a session focused on that, and we'll be finalising those dates shortly and communicating those out to you all. And we will be hosting our annual Conservation Finance Intensive full day in Brisbane this year on Thursday, the 24th of July. Put that in your diaries. Registrations will open shortly, and we hope to see many of you in person at this event. Any questions or requests, please shout out to us to provide you with more information. Panel, wonderful to hear from you. Thank you all for joining us and sharing your insights, your knowledge, and your inspiration for supporting the incredible work that's happening right across the sector. Have a fabulous rest of the afternoon.